Welcome to another episode of Work Comp Talk. Joining me once more is Bilal Kassem, president and co-founder of Pacific Workers, the Lawyers for Injured Workers, who also happen to be our sponsors for today's podcast. I'm excited to dive into today's topic because it's almost a simple topic that no one touches about. Maybe a lot of people have it in their mind, and we actually get to dive into it. And that is, what is court like in workers' comp? I know we've discussed certain topics of this in the past. For example, one of our last episodes, Bilal, you and I were discussing how people don't take court serious when it comes to workers' comp because of the fact that, you know, it's not a superior court. We're not going to jail for any, unless you do fraud, but
maybe
for the foreseeable, I guess, future, it's not like, oh, I'm going to go to jail because I didn't go to court.
Yeah.
You might just lose your whole entire benefits and your cases, but it's not like you're going to get incriminated in any way, shape, or form. Therefore, I decided to really discuss, what is court like? I've never been to workers' comp court, so please guide me through it.
So to start, our court in workers' comp is called the Workers' Compensation Appeals Board, and it's an administrative law court, which is different than a superior court. Nonetheless, it's still a constitutional court, which means in the California Constitution, there is authority there for the Workers' Comp Appeals Board to exist. And the Workers' Comp Appeals Board, surprise, surprise, governs workers' comp cases. So
yay! How
that's
simple.
where all things that workers' comp goes.
Awesome. So that's why you're always mentioning in the videos, if you need public assistance, if you want to dive into something that has to do with the workers' comp, you always direct them to the WCAB Appeals Board and their website. So that's kind of like the nuclear that handles workers' comp case within
exactly.
the court.
And you wouldn't go to superior court, right? So like our superior court system, it handles family law, probate, criminal, civil cases, contractual disputes, personal injury, stuff like that. Whereas you can't go and file a workers' comp case for superior court. It wouldn't happen.
Why is workers' comp not, for example, you mentioned PI being part of the superior court. Mm-hmm. Why isn't workers' comp part of superior court? What sets it apart?
So there's the Division of Workers' Comp, which is part of the Department of Industrial Relations. And under all these things, you have the Labor Code and the California Code of Regulations and whatnot that actually lay out what the Workers' Comp Appeals Board can do, what their powers are, procedural issues and things like that come up. So under the California Constitution and the Labor Code and California Code of Regulations, the Workers' Comp Appeals Board is its own governing body. It's its own thing.
It's like its own branch.
Yeah, whereas Superior Court and stuff is governed by different rules and different procedures and has its own judges and stuff that goes on there. So it's completely separate in our laws in California.
Interesting. I would have never imagined that it was its own branch, but now that you've explained it a little bit further, it makes total sense. So when would someone actually be in court? I mean, things have changed. COVID has hit. Different types of changes have happened in everyone's daily life. Is that still a thing? Do you still have to go to court? Are you doing this? Because, I mean, I know family law is now doing Zoom meetings and stuff like that. So where is workers' comp at?
It depends. So we still do have in-person court. It's far more rare these days. I think when COVID first hit, the court system wasn't set up for telephonic appearances and video appearances and all that stuff, and they quickly adapted.
Nice.
And now they do have video conferencing for trials and things like that. A lot of the hearings now we're actually calling in via dedicated conference line that the DWC has set up for the Workers' Comp Appeals Board. And so each judge has their own conference line number with their own access code, and those are all posted online and they're easily found. And ultimately, most hearings now are conducted via telephone. I think it's rare now that people go in for any particular hearings. If there are hearings that are still in person, it's usually trials. But even then, the parties are free to agree at this point with the judge's permission appear via video conference, which I think for a lot of our clients has been a huge deal because now we have people who live in remote areas who maybe they used to drive an hour and a half, pay for parking, sit at the Work Comp Appeals Board, wait for their case, only to be told, oh, nothing's happening today.
Come back another day.
Come back another day. Your court date's continued and stuff. And so it's like someone without the financial means to go, who's already straining to do that.
Yeah.
It's a really shitty situation. But now they can just dial in on their phone, which is fantastic because now it's giving access to justice for people who really don't have the means to be in court, or if they are there, it's a huge financial strain for them and such. So that's been really good.
I mean, forget the financial part, the fact that it's an injury. Most of them are going through excruciating pain to be up and about on their feet and just traveling in general. You know, how often or how far are the courts? Are there a lot? Is it just like going to your superior county court? How does this work? Is there specific courts only?
Yeah, so in California, at least, each county generally has its superior court, and that's its own thing, right? Workers' comp appeals boards are not so much county-based. They're more just geographically located. Sometimes they're in larger populated areas. So, for example, there's one in San Francisco. There's one in Oakland. And that's pretty much it for the Bay Area, right? You have San Jose, and you have Santa Rosa, and you have these other ancillary areas. But just generally, when you're talking about the nuclear Bay Area, there's like, whatever, 7-8 million people. You only have those two appeals boards. It's Oakland, San Francisco. And so those serve all of Alameda County. You know, you have San Francisco County, South San Francisco. You have San Mateo, Contra Costa. All of those are serviced by those two boards.
Wow.
Outside of that, then you have Stockton, you have San Jose, Santa Rosa, Sacramento. There are also satellite offices. So the board typically would set up shop in remote areas that would act as kind of like a hub for further out there, because there's places really far out there. What's an example? Susanville. We had clients from Susanville. There's a prison up there, and so we've had correctional workers as clients. And there's no real board out there. There's not a huge industry. There's not a real need to set up and staff, you know, a humongous court system up there. So they usually use like a remote office. Marysville used to be one for the Reading district office and stuff. So you have smaller offices that set up and serve these more remote areas as well.
Well, then it's a good thing that, you know, one, that people are able to do the court now via a dedicated conference line instead of having to travel. Again, people are injured. The last thing they want to do is travel super far, put their body already into already so many. I could just imagine.
People have a hard time getting to doctor's appointments, let alone, you know, court. So it can be difficult.
It's crazy. Well, I'm glad that there's that option now. So there's good things that came out of COVID.
Yeah, honestly, it's been fantastic.
If you look at the bright side, right?
And the judges, from my understanding, love it. All the attorneys love it. Clients love it. Like, everyone loves it because it's just so much more economical. It's friendly to people with injuries. It's better for the environment because it's not, you know, you're not sitting in a car and driving around and stuff with other people. It's been great for the most part.
So you're telling me judges love it. We all know judges act a certain way when they are, you know, in their seat, in their courtroom. How different has it been now that judges are doing this from wherever they're at? Is it a little bit more lenient? Or I guess I should ask you first, how are judges in the workers' comp court?
So every judge is different, right? The judges have a great deal of discretion to run their courtroom as they see fit, provided they're not doing anything illegal or unethical and such. They still do have guidelines, but you know, the judges still do have their personalities, and there's judges from different backgrounds, whether they came from the defense side or the applicant side, or they, you know, worked in the appeals department for a while and stuff like that. And so each judge has a different approach to how they handle their caseload. So they're different in that respect. But generally speaking, I think all judges have become very efficient with their process. So for example, when we used to go to the Oakland court, everyone would just huddle in the judge's courtroom, and the judge would basically just be like, who's next, right? And it was kind of like everyone's going in and out. People are like looking for other attorneys because they're like in other cases in other courtrooms, and it's just kind of a mess. Now when you call in, the judge will call the docket, like in Superior Court, and call your case name and ask you, are you ready to talk or not? And if you're not, they'll assign a callback time. And it's very mechanical, which is fantastic because it's really improved the quality, I think, of the judge's ability to handle their caseload efficiently. And I think they've been able to move cases forward and address issues certainly more efficiently as well.
Nice. So it's a little bit more structured.
Yeah.
It also allows, I guess, does the injured worker have to be part of that as well?
So generally, injured workers are required to appear at hearings. You'll see that the board still generates hearing notices, which injured workers should get in the mail when a hearing is set for calendar. And usually a hearing set by calendar either because one of the attorneys or parties filed what's called a declaration of readiness, which is to get a court date, or the judge has set the case on their own motion, meaning that there was a petition or motion or something else filed and the court wants everyone to show up.
Nice.
And so if you're required to show up, you have to call in and be present.
Yeah, you have to call
Virtually.
in. Okay, so what's the dress code like nowadays since you're calling in? Obviously, you're not. Are these calls video calls or are these calls just.
It depends on what it's for. So like if it's on the conference calendar, which means it's not a trial, then it's just via telephone, so you don't have to appear on camera.
Nice. So you can do this from the comfort of your bed.
Yeah, you can.
In your pajamas.
you could. I mean, at the end of the day, the court still wants to maintain its decorum, and I think there still needs to be some level of professionalism. And we tell our clients, act and present yourself as if you were in court. Make sure, for example, if you're at home, that you don't have a loud dog barking in the background. Like.
Kids running around.
Sometimes I've heard it when I've been on conference call waiting for my call with the judge, and I've heard you can hear traffic in the background, clearly someone's driving around in the car. And from my perspective, people have needs, they have stuff they need to get to, but from the court's perspective, I think the judges find that incredibly disrespectful.
Heck yeah.
That they're there, you're on their time, and there's something else that you find more important and distracting. 101, how to piss off a judge, do something like drive around with the radio on while you're on your court call, right? Don't
let alone drive around while you're in court.
Take it seriously. The judge is taking it seriously. It's your case. You need to be there and be present. So that means, setting up a quiet area in your house or your room, making sure there's no distractions.
Yeah.
And then if you're on trial, yeah, you're on camera usually. And for that, there's something called life-size video. It's a video conferencing app. It's similar to Zoom, basically. And we use that for trials at the appeals board now, for the most part, unless it's in person.
I was watching a show not that long ago, and there was, and I'm pretty sure I've mentioned this in one of our other podcasts episodes, there was a surgeon who had to appear to court, and I think it had to do with something of a speeding ticket or somewhat. Obviously, given the circumstances that we're living nowadays with COVID, the court had to be done via Zoom. So he's in the middle of the operating room, has a body there. I don't know what they were operating this person for, but this guy has blood all over his hands, and he answers a Zoom call, and he's just like, yeah, I'm here. And the court thought, again, like you mentioned earlier, that was so disrespectful, not only for the court itself, for the judge, but it was also very disrespectful that the fact that he was in operation, full operation, and he's not paying attention to the operation. He's not here and he's not there.
Yeah.
In mental state, I guess. So the judge goes off on him. Is like, how can you do this? And he just totally told him, no, you can't handle this case now, and you need to set your priorities straight. And the guy was like, I'm fine. It's blood dripping everywhere. He's like, I'm fine. He's like, I'm just digging my hand into someone's heart. But yeah, I guess that's a perfect example as to why you got to take it serious.
If you're going to be present, be present. Don't.
Exactly.
Not 1 foot in, 1 foot out. Obviously, if you're there on camera, you have to be. But, if you're on phone, it's a little bit different, I guess.
I always get yelled at by one of our client care specialists at the office, at the firm. She always says, your first sentence when it starts with, people should assume or people should know this. She's like, by automatically starting your sentence like that, I can already tell you're wrong. People don't have common sense nowadays. Sometimes they just don't think about it. It's that ease of, no one's going to care.
Even as attorneys, though, it's the same thing. I think we get so used to it that we start developing this level of informality just based on experience. And that's not good either, right? Because
that's scary.
We still have to keep it professional.
So, okay, we got a little idea, a little bit of what happens what the court it's like. What happens once you're in there? Once you're in the court, what do you expect?
So it depends on why you're there. If you're there telephonically, generally you should have spoken to your attorney ahead of time. Your attorney may tell you you don't need to bother appearing because the court's going to take the issue off calendar and just be done with it for the day. Or usually the attorney will say, no, I want you to be there. I want you to hear things, or I want you to speak to the judge about something. So it's really dependent upon what the issue is and whether it's telephonic. If you are dialing in, generally what happens is the judge will rattle off all the cases, essentially taking roll, and then go back down to the beginning of the list.
Do you get to listen to other people's cases?
You do.
Yay!
You do.
I like being
And
nosy.
sometimes there's issues there, and you're like, God, like, why are these people fighting over this, right?
Aw.
Like the poor applicant is waiting for like $50 in mileage reimbursement, and you can hear the attorney for the applicant like, it's been 60 days, it's been 90 days, it's been 2 years, and they still haven't paid my client, and like they're arguing over whether this poor person should be reimbursed for like $50 in mileage, and it's like taking up the court's time, it's taking up everyone else's time. The poor applicant needs the money, and like having to listen to like people fight over stuff like that's ridiculous, because like it should just be paid, they should be taken care of. Like,
Exactly.
it's dumb that this attorney had to go to court to get this person what they're entitled to, like especially
That's
for that.
so sad.
Other times you hear people fighting over really stupid issues like that doesn't make any sense, and like those I think are probably the most annoying, because for whatever reason egos get in the way. Attorneys argue just to argue. They're both wrong, no one's right, the judge is trying to straighten it out, and it's just like going off the rails. Those are always semi-entertaining and stuff.
That's
But usually
crazy.
the judges don't tend to like those.
How long does one of these court take? What are we expecting once from the beginning to end?
Depends. Does your last name start with A or Z?
Ooh, so they go alphabetically.
Usually it's alphabetical. So like what'll happen is most judges will say, there's a term, it's called OTOC. It's otherwise taken off calendar or something like that. And it's an acronym we all use in workers' comp. And it means essentially that the judge has taken the issue off of calendar, which means that there's been an agreement reached or whatever the case is. It's just not on the court's calendar anymore. And so what'll happen is when you first dial in, the judge will go through the list alphabetically and ask, if you have an agreement to OTOC or an agreed disposition, meaning to agree to something or take it off calendar, whatever, let me know. And so the judge will call the names, and someone will say, yeah, judge, we have an agreement to take this off calendar, or hey, judge, we have a stipulation that's ready for your signature. We've resolved the disputed issue. And what the judge will say is, okay, well, email it to me. Or they'll make a note and they'll take your hearing off of calendar. Otherwise, if you don't have an agreement, once the judge goes through all the names, the judge will usually go back down to the beginning of the list. And whoever hasn't already informally resolved their issue, they will talk in front of everyone to the judge about whatever their issue is. Other times, judges do things a little bit differently. They'll just say, you know what, call back at this time. They'll assign a number to you. They'll say, okay, well, you're case number 2. You'll call back in at 10:15.
Nice.
And then instead of sitting there on the phone waiting, you just talk to the defense attorney or whatever the issue is, and then you call back in at the scheduled time, and the judge will hear you then.
That's cool. I guess it kind of differentiates depending on what judge you get.
Kind of, yeah. And most judges kind of do it in a similar fashion with a docket call. It's pretty organized.
Nice.
It's much better than it used to be.
So what else does the injured worker expect within a workers' comp court, or in general, what is it like for them?
There's no jury. That's
Okay.
for one. It's all the issues are decided by the judge and only the judge. There's no, panel of juries. You don't give opening and closing arguments like you do in superior court. So that's much differently. The judge also issues decisions which are different than like a verdict, for example, but still the same. The judge will issue a written opinion and decision if your case is set for trial. If you don't like a judge's decision, there's an appeals process that you can use in court. It's something called the reconsideration unit. You file a petition for recon, which essentially is the workers' comp appeals board reviewing a judge's decision. So if the judge has ruled against you and you think that the judge abused their power or disregarded evidence or whatever the case may be, you can appeal that decision.
Have you ever appealed a decision?
Yeah, a lot. And I've lost a lot. I've won a few. I think the appeal standard in workers' comp is pretty high, right? When you're reviewing a judge's decision in workers' comp, they're reviewing it for really things like abuse of authority or that they've acted in excess of what the law is, or misinterpreted the law, something like that. The judges have a huge amount of discretion, especially when it comes to discussing things like credibility. So if a judge believes Bob over Sally, you can't appeal that, right? Because the judge has the power to decide that someone is more credible.
Right.
So on those kinds of issues, it's probably a losing battle to do that. But you file an appeals process through that. If you're not happy with then what the recon unit says, you can actually take it to the next level, which is going to the California Court of Appeal, which is where Superior Court cases go to on the appeals process. So even though you have these separate court systems, ultimately they do funnel into the same Court of Appeals system. And then if you don't like that, you can actually go to the California Supreme Court.
Interesting.
So they all funnel up into that direction.
So there's levels, like you said, there's funnels that go all the way up to the California Superior Court. That's good to know. Yep. So you kind of gave us an intro as to what is it like to go into a workers' comp court, whether that's virtual or in person. Is there anything else we need to dive that you haven't spoken about or that I have not asked? I mean, I don't even know what to expect when you go to court.
I mean, generally speaking, just from the get-go, if you're an injured worker, you probably won't need to talk to the judge ever. That's what your attorney's for. So you never really have to be prepared to explain yourself or do anything unless really your attorney has talked to you about it in advance and said, hey, look, I'm going to need you to talk to the judge. You should be to talk about this stuff or whatever the issue is. Be prepared to,
testify or
whatever your case may be. But pretty easily, right? There's conferences and there's trials, and you don't take testimony at conferences. So like, if you're showing up for a status conference, no sweat. Don't sweat it. If you're prepared for trial and you have a trial date, then you need to be prepared, because a trial, they do take live testimony. There are court reporters, just like in Superior Court, that document what's being said by the parties. They create the record that can be used for appeals and such. We submit evidence at trials and whatnot that's both a combination of testimony and documents, just like in Superior Court as well. And so trials, yes, you absolutely need to be prepared for that. Generally, trials are much different than conferences, because we'll dial into the conference line first, and then we'll usually jump on to the virtual app called LifeSize. Alternatively, if you're appearing in person for a trial, you go into the judge's courtroom and you're there, you're with the judge, you're with the court reporter, all the attorneys are present, and you do the whole dog and pony show.
Wow. Interesting.
Yeah.
So it's not that scary if you think about it. It's kind of similar to what I guess a normal court would be like, if anyone's ever been to court.
Yeah. I think general preparedness is the key. And kind of, if you have an attorney, like talking to your attorney ahead of time.
Yeah. Is there cameras allowed, etc.? Because I know people forget. What are the rules?
No, you're not supposed to be recording and stuff. In fact, in California, it's illegal. We're a two-party consent state, which means that you can't illegally. Well, it's illegal to record someone without their permission, but you can't record them without their permission.
That's true.
So you always, if you're going to record someone, you have to tell them you're recording, which is like, you ever dial into customer service lines and they're like, this call may be recorded for quality assurance.
All the time.
Yeah, that's just because they're legally obligated. They really don't want to tell you that, but. So yeah, you can't record. You can't like have your phone underneath the table, like looking up and like peeking over and recording.
Right, that'd be hilarious.
Photos and stuff. That you're not supposed to do that. So
interesting.
Yeah. But trials are serious. It's a real deal. The judge really does have a lot of power, and it's up to them to decide your case. And so you want to be professional. You want to be polite. You want to be on time. You want to listen to your attorney's instructions. If you don't have an attorney and your case is set for trial, you can go to what's called the information assistance. They're great. Granted, they're kind of like the public defenders or workers' comp, so they usually have high volume, which means they can't really give you the specialized time and attention I think you need to really be successful at trial. But yeah, it can be difficult and it can be intimidating.
So it's best if you are going into trial and you have something going on, get yourself an attorney. Speaking about attorneys, let's go into our sponsors. We will be ending this podcast with showcasing a little bit about Pacific Workers. You can always hit them up on social media. They're on Facebook, they're on Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn. I mean, you name it, they're everywhere, including YouTube. And of course, you can always follow us on social media as well. As far as Work Comp Talk podcast, we are on your favorite app platforms. If we're not, please request so that we can be. And we will leave you guys with this and catch you guys on the next episode. Thanks, Bilal.
Yep.
Back in January 2017, it was just right after New Year's. I was on the computer replying back to emails. And the next thing you know, I'm feeling stabs in my back. I turn around and my manager, she stabbed me in the stomach. She had hallucinations. Her medication was causing it to attack me. I had a huge operation. They had to open me up and take out all my organs and make sure nothing happened. that time I was just so broken, asking what did I do to deserve this? I was just so confused as to why something like this happened at work. Something like this happened to me, of all people. The work insurance that I was with, I felt like they weren't helpful at all. But then I started realizing, like, wait, there's lawyers for this. Maybe I can get help. Pacific Workers' Comp really took the time to hear me out, care for me, and reassure me that everything's gonna be okay. Everyone from admin to the lawyers, they're so welcoming.
Our clients have expectations of us to fight for them, to call them back, to communicate with them. This is about going above and beyond. This is about helping them where they could never have expected it. That's who we are.
It's not just their job to care about you, but they genuinely want you to succeed every step of the way. I would definitely recommend Pacific Workers' Comp. I wasn't a believer at first. I didn't think anyone was gonna help me, but this team really did.